All right. So just straight off the bat, with no intro or anything like that, we're going to get right into it. And I'm going to tell you why Dana White is probably happy with Francis Ngannou losing to Anthony Joshua. And a lot of that is just for the UFC to be able to have the strong narrative behind them. And what do I mean by that? Well, obviously, John Jones is the current undisputed UFC heavyweight champion of the world right now. Okay. And that's very significant to understand, considering that they want to be seen as the best promotion in the world, right? So, how can you be the best promotion in the world if you don't have the best fighter in front of you? Now, unfortunately, you're never going to get Anthony Joshua, I'm sorry, Tyson, no, not Tyson Fury, John Jones to fight Francis Ngannou. I'm obviously having a little bit of a Freudian slip there because I truly believe that a lot of these guys have equal footing when it comes to marketing and it comes to, let's say, their particular standings in the sport that they participate in. And more so with Anthony Joshua after the performance that he had. But yeah, off with that tangent, really, it is all about driving a narrative. And right now, you can really drive that John Jones is the best fighter in the world. Obviously, there's the other problem with Tom Aspinall being the interim champion and John Jones refusing to fight him, or at least refusing to do so within the recent time frame, meaning that there's injuries that's going on with John Jones that perhaps may uh, disable him from going into a fight with Tom Aspinall, right? So now it's kind of a mixed topsy turvy situation going on because we really don't know who the best fighter in the world is in terms of the heavyweight division because we never had Francis Ngannou and John Jones go at it. So we can't prove anything when it comes to those two. But if you are the UFC, and everything is about your bottom dollar, guess what? This is what you have to do. This is what you have to do. You have to drive the narrative. Let me show you exactly what I mean by driving the narrative. Okay, I'm going to play you a video of Dana White right now.
Boxing match last night. Did you talk to Eddie after it?
I did not. I mean, I saw it on social media. Yeah.
What did you make of that finish in the Francis fight?
What do you mean? What did I make?
Yeah,
what did I make
like,
of it?
When you saw it, like it was. People are saying it's one of the more violent knockouts in boxing history.
Yeah, I mean, going into the Fury fight, if Fury trained for the fight and didn't show up and look like he ate Tyson Fury, that's probably the way that fight would have ended too.
So I find something very interesting about this, right? Now, obviously, with the recent times with Benoit Saint Denis saying that he had staph infection going into the fight with Dustin Poirier, yes, this is common for a lot of fighters to drive up a narrative. Okay, so obviously Benoit Saint Denis lost to Dustin Poirier. He felt that he could have done better. We all feel like we could do better when we lose a fight. That's just human nature. We're going to tell you that, well, this happened or that happened or such and such this or such and such that. The reality is every fighter is going to talk good about themselves, but what's unusual is when a promoter makes excuses for you and he's not even your fighter. Now, that's interesting. That's interesting that he said, well, if Tyson Fury took it seriously, but guess what? Tyson Fury said that he took that fight with Francis Ngannou very serious. So what is the difference with, I don't know, man. The thing is that, again, you have to speak up for your own product, and that's all that Dana White is doing, and his job as a promoter.
I mean, listen, the crossover, you know how I feel about crossovers into boxing, and that's how they end, just like that.
Well, again, the crossovers in boxing, of which you made plenty of money over Conor McGregor and probably took a lot of his purse. But again, I think there's some fairness to that, considering that without the UFC, I don't think we would really know who Conor McGregor is. Okay, so this is really important to understand. The UFC is the driving force behind Conor McGregor's promotion. Now, here's the thing about that, though, right? It is mostly of Conor's work, but at the same time, it is the promotion's job to, well, promote you. That's the name of the game, is promotion. Now, the issue is that, well, it's mostly Conor McGregor that has done more of the promoting rather than the UFC itself. And the proof of that is the fact that he is bigger than the company. And by the way, this is a reason why you're going to have a hard time getting him back into the cage.
That.
Did you see the match, the boxing match last night? Did you talk to Eddie after it?
I did not. I mean, I saw it on social media.
Now, I got to tell you something about Dana White and Eddie Hearn. By the way, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe as I drop this hot content for you. So the best way I would describe Dana White is very similar to the relationship between George Bush and Tony Blair. In other words, Tony Blair is the Eddie Hearn in this situation, and Dana White is a George Bush. Now, for those of you that did not grow up in the War on Terror era, okay, during the time of George Bush's presidency and the time when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister of England, they were quite some good allies, and they worked off of each other. Just like Dana White and Eddie Hearn, they work off of each other. What do I mean by that? For example, when Billy Joe Saunders went and fought Canelo Alvarez, guess where Billy Joe Saunders was training at weeks prior to him going to Texas? Well, it was the Performance Institute in Las Vegas, and just among other things, right? Obviously, when they do UFC London shows, Dana White invites Eddie Hearn, and of course, Anthony Joshua, by the way, for those of you that don't know, have been to UFC London fights several times already, right? So all within the connections of Eddie Hearn being able to provide that, but also just the I'm sure there's other business acumens that these two guys are getting into as well. But understand this, right? Also, Eddie Hearn has mentioned plenty of times that he believes Dana White is his hero and somebody that he looks at as a clear example on what to do when it comes to promotion. And also, he wants to bring boxing in the state of where the UFC is at, which, by the way, can be detrimental to the fighters in boxing in terms of their negotiation leverage.
Yeah.
What did you make of that finish in the Francis fight?
What do you mean? What did I make?
Yeah,
what did I make
like,
of it?
When you saw it, like it was. People are saying it's one of the more violent knockouts in boxing history.
Yeah. So once again, this is something you guys have to understand, right? The UFC is in a business for itself. In other words, they're going to try to promote and protect their interests, and not only protect their interests, but also protect their narrative. So in other words, let me give you some historical examples. George St. Pierre, for one. When George St. Pierre fought Johnny Hendricks, by the way, a very tough fight, the UFC knew somewhere down the line that George St. Pierre was going to retire. The guy was on a 10-fight winning streak, 11-fight winning streak, and over probably 10 title defenses or somewhere close to it. I don't know the exact number, but George St. Pierre is probably the highest defended 170-pound champion in the history of the company. When he left the arena, they had Megan Oliva try to take the belt from him. And let me tell you why. Well, for one, the fight with Johnny Hendricks was very close. George St. Pierre managed to edge off a decision, but he wanted to retire, and that was bad for business. And let me tell you why. If George St. Pierre, which he did, by the way, he retired, and what happened as a result afterwards, we had a very confusing 170-pound division. Of course, that same 170 division that brought in the Rory McDonald versus Robbie Lawler fight, which, by the way, was probably one of the greatest 170-pound championship matchups in the company's history of the UFC. And of course, Rory McDonald was the student of George St. Pierre and Faraz Zahabi. And what they were trying to do was the same thing that Islam Makhachev and Khabib are doing right now, which is what? Khabib being the legendary champion, passing it down to his student, becoming the champion of the same weight class as Islam. And this is the same trajectory that Rory McDonald was set up for in terms of being a student of George St. Pierre and Faraz Zahabi. Well, obviously that didn't work out, but it did bring us great fights in between, but it also brought a lot of confusion into the UFC. For example, Robbie Lawler, legendary fighter, nothing against him, but when he became champion and defeated Johnny Hendricks from the vacant championship, guess what? The unfortunate aspect of that was, oh, and by the way, I think they had fought twice. So it was one on Johnny Hendricks and one for Robbie Lawler. Nonetheless, when Robbie Lawler became champion, he was a champion with double-digit losses. Now, is that something that the UFC can get behind? As opposed to George St. Pierre, who literally beat every man that he was in there with. Of course, he lost to Matt Hughes, came back, redeemed himself, and became champion after he lost his first title match. Second time around, he lost to Matt Serra. By the way, a guy who came in as an Ultimate Fighter winner, in which the stipulation was the winner of this particular season was going to get a title shot against George St. Pierre by the end of it. Only for that to backfire on the UFC, because obviously George St. Pierre was and always will be the golden boy of that organization. He lost. And after he lost, well, he came and regained it back. So in other words, he beat every guy that he's been in there with, no matter the situation, right? So it left a very sour taste in the UFC. So in comes Michael Bisping, right? He became the 185 champion of the world. And George St. Pierre decided he wanted to come back. I don't think at the time when the UFC decided to sign George St. Pierre back on and only to compete in a weight class higher than what he was originally the champion of, I don't think they had anticipated that George St. Pierre was going to leave. At the same time, I also think that they may have thought that Michael Bisping has George St. Pierre's number after being inactive for a couple of years at that point, right? From 2013 to 2017. So 4 years out. And then he comes back in and wins the title and then leaves again, only to create more confusion in the 185 division. But they came through with that because with that came Adesanya. Israel Adesanya fought for an interim championship against Kelvin Gastelum, and then eventually was crowned the undisputed champion, and then went on to have a great title run and a great rivalry with none other than Alex Pereira, who then went on to become the double champion. Well, not double champion, but two-weight champion, because he didn't win it both at the same time, right? So it's not the same thing as Daniel Cormier or Conor McGregor in that light. Now, speaking of Conor McGregor, I got to say this. Conor McGregor is never going to fight again, or at least not for a very long time. And let me explain to you why. For one, he's got too much money. Roadhouse is out right now. And by the way, I'm very surprised why Roadhouse is out on Prime and not in theaters. And I think there's several factors to take a look at as to why that is. For one, when it comes to Prime and the current status of movies right now, it is not like the 1990s where every movie was highly anticipated, right? If it was a blockbuster movie that had a great following, that had some known people in it, such as Jake Gyllenhaal, right? Conor McGregor, bigger star than anybody in the MMA industry. And usually they love to bring in these sports stars into movies, just like Vargas when he did Alpha Dog with Justin Timberlake, and among other movies that many other fighters in the past have engaged in or have been a part of. So now we're in this situation in the modern times where everything is about digital streaming, right? A lot of people are not going out into movie theaters as much. Many people are not going out into the malls as much because guess what? Now you can buy things online and have it delivered to you within a moment's notice. Okay, that is the advantages that we have in the world today. However, with that also, and not to mention the streaming aspects of music, which really hindered the selling and buying of CDs from the music industry. But that's another story here and there, sort of correlates to this particular topic at hand when it comes to Conor McGregor and his movie debut with Jake Gyllenhaal, which surprisingly is out on Prime rather than out on movie theaters. And again, it is because there's just not a high interest for these things. Nonetheless, it's a money-making scheme for Conor McGregor, and not a scheme, but obviously a business venture and something that enables his brand to become even bigger than it already is, which brings the big problem at hand, trying to get Conor McGregor to fight. That is going to be a problem. It's going to be a very big issue because he's too rich, and the bottom line and the bottom dollar for the UFC is just not going to pay out. For example, they host a Conor McGregor event, right? They pay him a certain amount of money. I'm not giving any numbers or anything like that because obviously I don't know the exact, and most of us don't unless you're a UFC insider or you're the one that's handling Conor McGregor's contract. But the way that I see it is they can't pay him enough for them to get back whatever it is that they invested for that event. So let me repeat that again. They cannot pay him the type of money that is going to bring a huge return as opposed to what they're going to pay him and the money that they're investing on top of it. It just doesn't make sense for them, right, as a company in the UFC. Now, the problem also, here's the second stage of the problem. They don't want Conor McGregor to become a free agent. They don't want a product that they built for anybody to just go out there and pick out and use after all these years, literally 10 years now, over 10 or 11 years of promoting Conor McGregor and making him the product that he is today. They don't want the Saudis to pay him, even though the Saudis can legitimately pay him way more money than the UFC ever can, and will do it for a much bigger fight and maybe even some easier fights, depending on how you view Manny Pacquiao at his stage right now, which is the anticipated fight that they're trying to make with him. But guess what? In the midst of that, unfortunately, Conor McGregor got beat out by another Conor in Conor Benn, potentially now fighting Manny Pacquiao as a result, of which you've seen during the Anthony Joshua and Francis Ngannou card. They went and faced off in the crowd or somewhere in the event or somewhere in the facility of that arena. They had all the cameras, they had a face off, and basically it's one of those situations where, hey, if the Saudis want it, if Manny Pacquiao wants it, and you know Manny Pacquiao is always down to fight, and then Conor Benn is an upcoming undefeated boxer who's looking for some big names in his resume, in which he tried to make that fight with Chris Eubank only to fail his drug test and eventually get his license taken away, only for Conor Benn to go to the United States and other jurisdictions to renew his license as a result. So this is what we have going on with Conor McGregor in terms of his career trajectory. He's too expensive, and then on top of that, he's also too big, yet they also don't want to give him up in order to somehow save face for the company. But you got to understand, this is a reason why, as what Kevin Holland said last week during the lead up to the fight card of UFC 299, when you were asked about Michael Venom Page's performance in Bellator, he said, nobody is paying money to go watch Bellator fights. Everybody is paying to watch UFC fights. Now, why is that? Well, for the simple fact that the UFC, whether you like it or not, has monopolized the game to a certain extent. And whatever proof of that can vary, and however way you want to look at the situation or what side of the fence you may be on and how you view it, or how you look at the severity of the situation. But man, I got to tell you that this is the truth. This is the reason why everybody will pay to watch the UFC, because the one thing that they know how to do better than anybody is drive up the narrative. And what do I mean by that? Why do I say that they know how to drive up the narrative for their particular advantages in terms of being able to have contract leverage and being able to have leverage over other promotions when it comes to, let's say, which fights you want to watch on the weekends. This is the reason why. Because they will protect their narrative at all cost and will even downplay some of their own fighters to somehow drive up that narrative. I got to tell you, I made a video a couple of months ago comparing the UFC to Manchester City. So what do I mean by that? For those of you that don't know anything about soccer or English football and what have you, let me explain something to you about Manchester City. So Manchester City is owned by the Emiratis, the same Emirati government, the same Emirati royal family that does business with the UFC. Okay? And why is that significant? Well, for one, there's no correlation between Manchester City or the UFC other than the comparison of how they run their roster. So Manchester City has the biggest player in all of soccer right now, which is Erling Haaland. By the way, also signed to Logan Paul's Prime drink, which is a quite interesting triangle of networking and who knows who in this particular situation, right? So Erling Haaland is the biggest star in Manchester City. He's also the leading scorer. He literally scored like maybe 84 goals or 40 some odd goals in less than, I don't know. Look up the numbers. All I'm saying is Erling Haaland is a phenom, right? This isn't a soccer channel. I'm not about to break down statistics, but let's just say this for conversation's sake. Erling Haaland is the modern Michael Jordan. And yet, even if he is the modern Michael Jordan of soccer, Erling Haaland is not bigger than Manchester City. So as a result, the UFC operates in the same kind of way. And this is where Conor McGregor comes in. There were a few times where Manchester City behind the scenes has threatened to either transfer or trade Erling Haaland, even if he is the best player right now. And why do they do that? Why do they say that they're going to do something like that to a top player like this? For the simple fact that they don't want any player in Manchester City to be bigger than the entire brand. Okay, they don't want one player to be bigger than the brand. The UFC, the same thing. They don't want one fighter to be bigger than the brand. Now, with Conor McGregor, he came in at a perfect storm in terms of the type of promotion that was given to him in the appropriate time. Let me explain. He came into UFC at 2013, had a little bit of some problems with injuries, came back, really went off and running from 2014 to 15. And when 2016 came around, this is when Zuffa, the owners of the UFC at the time, which was the Fertitta brothers, okay, had decided they were going to sell their company to Endeavor. By the way, a company owned by Ari Emanuel, who, by the way, is the owner of Endeavor's, also the owner of an agency that was promoting or managed Ronda Rousey at the time. Right? So Conor McGregor came in at the time where they were trying to sell the company. And then obviously with that, they put CM Punk in one of the fights, in one of the events, in order to drum up attention for the company, in order to make it juicy for Endeavor to buy. Oh, we got a product that involves CM Punk, now involves this big star in Conor McGregor. So they really went double time on trying to promote Conor McGregor. And as a result, well, it created wonders for Conor McGregor. It gave him a Floyd Mayweather fight as a result. And then it made him a whole lot bigger than what the UFC had anticipated. Now, we know that Conor McGregor was going to be big, but I don't think they understood how big he was going to be. And unfortunately, he got big to the point where he became bigger than the product. And this is where we are at today when it comes to understanding why it is hard to get Conor McGregor to fight, and also why Dana White is in absolute glee of the results in a Francis Ngannou loss against Anthony Joshua. Because this is what they have to do. They have to protect their narrative at all cost, And that is just what they're going to do until they are long and gone out of the MMA world and the combat sports space. So this has been my 25 minutes of explaining to you guys why Dana White is happy about Francis Ngannou's loss. And I gave you the reasons why. And also why Conor McGregor may not be fighting for a long time. And I hope that this gave you the most rational and objective explanation that you can find out there in the combat sports space of YouTube. So don't forget to like and subscribe, inshallah. First day of Ramadan. I'm glad to be able to do this live with you guys and also drop this hot content. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, and I'll see you guys soon in the next one, inshallah.